Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that your name be glorified in all that we do. We ask that we may know you, love you, and serve you. We ask that we may be the people you call us to be, especially as we prepare for the coming Advent season and we look at the readings in this end of the liturgical year. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, of course, today is, in fact, Monday of the 33rd week in Ordinary Time, and we really get to a lot of the end time readings, and of course, nothing is more end time, I would guess, than the last book of the Bible, which, of course, is, how many times am I going to say, of course? Is the book of Revelation, also known as the Apocalypse. It's interesting. I remember when I was very young, and sometimes I would listen to, I forget the name of the program. If you're an evangelical and you're listening to this program, you may remember, I believe it came out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it was actually about teaching the Bible to children, and I think it was Aunt Bertha. Now, notice I said Aunt because it obviously didn't come from Boston. I believe it was Aunt Bertha, right to Aunt Bertha, and I believe it was. And they always talked about the book of Revelation, but back then, before the newer forms of the Bible came out, we always called it the Apocalypse, which is what we call it in Spanish and Portuguese, and I'm sure other languages too. It's called the Apocalypse, but since we'll say since the 70s, we too have called it the Book of Revelations. Now, little bit of history of this book. This book almost did not make it into the Bible. Eventually, they did decide it was part of canon. It is the last book in the Bible. It's also the last book written that is part of the canon of literature. You do know there's tons of what would appear to be biblical literature, but it is not in the canon of the Bible, which is what we find in the Bible, the Catholic Bible. Now, in the non-Catholic Christian Bible, you will find what they will call the Apocrypha, which is certain books that they don't believe are part of the canon, but we do. So there's certain books and parts of books too. So, and the Book of Revelation was the last that was accepted, and it's accepted in both the what we would call the Protestant Bible and the Catholic Bible. The term Protestant obviously refers to those churches that were involved when there was the great split that started with Martin Luther, but there are other churches that have developed since then, and I don't know if the evangelicals call themselves Protestants. They call themselves evangelicals. So, but oftentimes the term is the Protestant Bible, but, and there's all different forms, but somehow the term sticks, even though the evangelicals, I don't know if they call themselves Protestants. That's if someone who's evangelical wants to tell me, you can let me know. It's interesting because our reading today comes to us from not only the book of Revelation, but it is the first of what are known as the 7 letters. And in the book of Revelation, in chapter 2, and believe it's 3, have 7 letters to the 7 churches, and today's is to the church of Ephesus. And these were various places, obviously at the end of the first century of Christianity, that had been evangelized and are now living the gospel message. And so the writer, who is St. John of Patmos, who is exiled to the island of Patmos, is writing this as dictated to him in a vision from Jesus coming and tell him, write this down. So this is part of the story of Revelation. And he says to each and every one of the churches. Now, there are 7 letters. 5 of them are negative. 2 of them are positive. So if you were part of the little group, you'd like, I hope I get a positive letter. You know what that feeling can be like from our time at school. But 7 of them have a negativity and 5 of them have positivity. And obviously today, chances are you're going to get a negative letter, and in fact we do. Now, usually the letter actually is praising to a point, and then this is what needs to be changed. And usually the threat is, I will remove the lampstand from you if you do not change. I'll look again as to whether that's one of the threats in today's reading. It's important for us to see this letter for what it is, because this is a letter that's mentioned in a special way by St. Jerome. Now, St. Jerome wrote what is known as the Vulgate. What that means, and I think we talked about it with Alfred Mera on the other show, and the Vulgate is the original Bible and the original scriptures are written in Hebrew in the Old Testament, in Greek in the New Testament. So St. Jerome knew Hebrew and Greek and Latin, so he translated the whole thing into Latin. So the original Vulgate was in Latin, which at the time was the language of the people, which is what Vulgate means. So the people could now read, those who could read the Bible, because the entire thing was in, thing isn't the right word, I suppose, but the entire Bible was now in Latin. And so he knew the Bible very well. And there's an interesting part of this letter that isn't in the reading, but it's an important one to know. We'll talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. We'll be right back right after this. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com. And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. Check out the website. Check out the archives of the show. If you're looking for a donation that might be tax deductible and you'd want to help us out, please send a donation to the parish, and there's information there how to do that. 43 Holton Street in Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. And by donating it to the parish supports the radio show, and we can continue the radio show, but you're also supporting us because the parish is in fact tax-deductible contribution for your church. Please consider that, especially during this end of the year when you're kind of putting your taxes together and stuff. So please consider that. Anyway, here we are talking, as I was saying, about St. Jerome. And St. Jerome has this fascinating quote. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the beginning of it. Not all bishops are bishops indeed. You consider Peter, Mark, Judas as well. Notice Stephen. Look also on Nicholas, sentenced in the Apocalypse by the Lord's own lips, whose shameful imaginations give rise to the heresy of the Nicolaitans. Let a man examine himself, and so let him come. Well, the Nicolaitans are mentioned in this letter. It's not in the reading that you'll hear on Sunday, or no, today, rather. Later on today. But if you look up the reading, which is the second chapter of the book of Revelation, this letter to the Ephesians, to Ephesus, you will see, in fact, that that's mentioned there. That's where he gets that. And where Jesus, speaking to John of Patmos, St. John of Patmos, also known as St. John of God, by the way, says that he is happy that they hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. And that's from this, of which we know very little, this Bishop Nicholas, not obviously Saint Nicholas, because, by the way, Saint Nicholas is like 600 years later or 500 years later. But here we are looking at this bishop named Nicholas who was condemned by Jesus. And that's about all we know, by the way. There's very little information, but obviously Jerome understood this. And he said, be careful. And what that really means is, goes back to what Jesus says, by their fruits you will know them. What are their fruits? And if you want to be fruitful, especially if you're a priest or a bishop, if you want to be fruitful in your ministry, make sure you are a person of prayer. And that's obviously applies to the laity as well. Be a person of prayer, because that's what they understood, those good bishops, and those not so good bishops would look at Jesus and try to form Jesus in their own image. That's what Judas did. Jesus is not acting the way I would expect him to be. Therefore, obviously, he's not who he says he is. I will betray him. And the Nicolaitans must have been something similar. So that's why it's important to be humble, to be rooted in the Lord, and to be humble before the Lord, and at the same time to be people of prayer, so that you can grow in humility and bear much fruit. So that all comes from this particular letter today. Some of it is in the reading, and some of it you can read on your own. Second chapter of the book of Revelation, also known as the Apocalypse. We'll talk more tomorrow. Have a blessed day. If you would like to support our program, please consider a donation to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. There are several ways to consider this. One is to purchase any of our merchandise, which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. There are coffee mugs there. There's also my latest book, Encounter Christ in Your Humanity, all of which you can find at the shopping tab at CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can also donate to the show directly through either the Donate tab, also at CatholicAudiomedia.com, or by sending a donation through the U.S. Postal Service with your questions and comments at 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. That's St. Anthony Parish, 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, 02134. Finally, the best way you can support our parish is to attend Mass on Sundays at 10 o'clock and be a part of our parish. We thank you for any support you would like to give to St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, the sponsoring parish for this media outreach to Catholics and other Christians in the WROL, WEZE, and podcast listening audience. In Cristo vivimos.